The Cottonwood River ran high that spring, fed by snowmelt from the mountains. Its banks were slick with mud, and its current carried a cold bite that could steal the breath from a strong man in seconds. Eli Boone stood knee-deep in it, boots braced against the pull, washing the dust from his face. He was lean and sunburned, with a jawline carved by years of wind and eyes that didn't much trust the world. Boone had drifted into Hollow Creek 3 days earlier. Like every town he passed through, it wasn't on his map, mostly because Boone didn't carry a map. He'd stayed to rest his horse, take a meal, and maybe play a few quiet hands at the saloon. But the sheriff's notice tacked to the general store door made him keep his head down. Wanted for questioning. Eli Boone. Armed and dangerous. It wasn't the first time he'd seen his name nailed to a wall, but it meant he'd keep moving. That morning, though, something changed. A sharp cry cut through the river's rush. Boone turned. Downstream, a boy no older than 12 fought against the current, his arms flailing, water swallowing his mouth each time he tried to shout. His hat bobbed once, then vanished. Boone swore under his breath. The river was deeper than he thought. The current yanked at his legs, dragging him sideways. He pushed through, each step slow and heavy. The boy's face was pale, eyes wide with panic. Boone lunged, caught a fistful of shirt, and hauled him up just as the current tried to take them both. "Hold on!" Boone growled. They staggered toward the bank, Boone's breath burning in his chest. By the time they reached solid ground, the boy coughed up half the river and collapsed in the mud. Boone knelt, making sure he was breathing. "You trying to get yourself killed?" Boone asked, more gruff than he meant to. The boy blinked up at him. "Horse spooked, slipped." His voice was thin, trembling. Boone gave him a quick once-over. No broken bones, just shaken and cold. He pulled the boy's soaked jacket tighter around him and said, "Where's home?" Before the boy could answer, the pounding of hooves rolled in from the tree line. 4 riders burst into view, rifles across their saddles. The man in front wore a star on his chest. The sheriff. Boone recognized the set of his shoulders and the hard line of his mouth. He'd seen it before, in towns where men thought justice came faster from a gun. The sheriff swung down from his horse, eyes flicking from Boone to the boy. "Tommy?" The boy scrambled to his feet. "Pa! He pulled me out!" He pointed at Boone. The sheriff's gaze fixed on Boone, cold and sharp. "That's so?" Boone didn't answer. He didn't need to. The sheriff already knew. But instead of thanks, the lawman's jaw tightened. "Boys," he said to his deputies, "take him." 2 men dismounted, rifles still in hand. Boone stayed still as they stepped in close, knowing a twitch could get him shot. "What's the charge?" Boone asked. "Same as it was last time I heard your name," the sheriff said flatly. "Murder." Boone's lips twitched in something almost like a smile. "You've been hunting me a while then." The sheriff didn't answer. He just nodded to his men. Rough hands pulled Boone's arms behind him, and cold iron closed around his wrists. The boy looked between them, confusion creasing his brow. "Pa, he saved me." The sheriff didn't look at him. "Mount up. We're taking him back to town." They rode in silence, Boone's hands bound, the boy trailing behind with worry etched on his young face. Boone kept his gaze on the horizon, mind working. The river had nearly taken him. Now the law just might. By the time they reached Hollow Creek, the sun was sinking, painting the main street in long shadows. Folks stepped out of doorways to watch as the sheriff led his prisoner to the jailhouse. Inside, the cell door clanged shut behind Boone. The sheriff stepped close to the bars. "You've been running for a long time, Boone. Tonight, that ends." Boone met his eyes. "You sure about that?" The sheriff didn't answer. He just turned the key, locked it, and walked away. Boone sat on the cot, the scent of damp wood and iron thick in the air. Outside, the town was settling into night, but Boone knew this night wasn't like any other. The way the sheriff looked at him, this wasn't just about an old charge. Some debts, Boone thought, don't come in dollars, and the ones that come in blood are the hardest to pay. The jailhouse was quiet except for the low creak of the rocking chair in the front room. Boone could hear one of the deputies keeping watch, the steady rhythm of the chair's motion like a clock ticking away the hours until morning. The air smelled faintly of kerosene from the lantern hanging on the wall, its light casting a dull glow across the iron bars. He leaned back on the cot, eyes half closed, letting his mind wander through the past. It was true. He'd been in Hollow Creek before, though not for long. A single night years ago, a poker game gone wrong in a saloon at the edge of town. Cards were called, tempers flared, and a man named Rafe Coulter wound up dead on the floor. Boone had left before the law came, not because he was guilty, though plenty figured he was, but because he'd learned that sometimes the truth mattered less than who had the louder voice. Bootsteps clicked on the wooden floor. The sheriff appeared in the doorway. "Still can't believe you're fool enough to come back here," he said. Boone didn't move. "Wasn't exactly on my itinerary." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "That boy you pulled from the river, that's my son. You've put him in a hard spot." Boone raised an eyebrow. "Saving his life puts him in a hard spot?" "Saving him doesn't erase what you've done," the sheriff said, his tone edged with something between anger and something heavier, maybe guilt. "You think dragging my son out of the water buys you a clean slate?" Boone's mouth curved into a wry smile. "I didn't pull him out for you, or for a deal. I just didn't want to watch a kid drown." The sheriff's jaw tightened. He stepped closer to the bars. "Rafe Coulter was my cousin. You remember him?" Boone's gaze hardened. "I remember a loudmouth who couldn't handle losing at cards. I also remember he was the one who drew first." "That's not how I heard it," the sheriff said. "That's because the only one left standing to talk about it was you," Boone shot back. The sheriff's eyes flickered, just for a moment, before he straightened and turned toward the door. "Trial's at first light. You won't be needing breakfast." Boone watched him leave, the sound of the lock sliding home echoing in the small space. From the corner, a low voice whispered, "You didn't kill him, did you?" Boone turned. Tommy stood just outside the reach of the lantern light, hands in his pockets, glancing nervously toward the front room. "You didn't kill Rafe Coulter." Boone studied the boy. He looked like his father. Same eyes, same stubborn tilt of the chin. But there was a softness there, the kind you didn't often see in men who carried the law for long. "No," Boone said, "but I made the mistake of being in the wrong place when someone else pulled the trigger." Tommy shifted his weight, his boots scuffing the floor. "Pa, he's not himself about Rafe. Folks say Rafe was trouble, but Pa, he still feels like he's got to do something about it." Boone leaned forward. "Then tell him the truth about tonight. Tell him the man you're fixin' to hang saved his son's life." Tommy looked away. "It's not that simple. If I go against him, he won't ever forgive me. And if I say nothing, you'll hang for something you didn't do." The sound of the rocking chair stopped abruptly in the other room. Tommy stiffened, then stepped back into the shadows. Boone didn't call after him. He figured the boy was already walking a line between blood and conscience. Hours passed. Boone dozed and woke, the lamplight burning low. Then he heard it, the distant thud of hooves on dirt, slow at first, then more, until it sounded like a small herd moving through the dark. Boone shifted to the barred window, peering out into the moonlit street. Figures on horseback emerged from the shadows, a half-dozen at first, then more. Faces obscured by wide brims and bandanas, rifles slung across their backs. They weren't deputies. They stopped just short of the jailhouse, dismounting in silence. Boone felt his pulse quicken. Whoever they weren't here for a friendly visit. One man stepped forward into the lamplight, tall, broad-shouldered, with a jagged scar running down his cheek. Boone recognized him instantly. Caleb Rourke. A name whispered in saloons from Texas to Montana, a man with more blood on his hands than a butcher. Boone muttered under his breath, "Well, hell." Rourke looked up toward Boone's cell window, and the grin that spread across his face was the kind that didn't hold a shred of warmth. The front door of the jail creaked open, The sheriff stepped out onto the boardwalk, his hand resting casually on his revolver. "Evening, Rourke." Rourke's grin widened. "Sheriff? Heard you had a guest I've been meaning to see." "This is my town," the sheriff said evenly. "You've got no business here." "See, that's where you're wrong," Rourke replied. "Boone and me, we've got unfinished business. Man owes me more than you can imagine." Boone's hands tightened on the bars. He knew exactly what Rourke meant, and it wasn't money. The sheriff didn't move. "He's facing justice here. You want him, you can wait until the trial's done." Rourke's voice dropped low. "I'm not the waiting type." The street was silent except for the creak of leather and the distant rustle of wind. Boone could feel the tension tightening like a rope between them. If the sheriff stepped aside, Boone was as good as dead. If he didn't, there was going to be blood in the street before morning. The sheriff's hand stayed on his revolver, but Boone could tell he was weighing more than just the law. The air between him and Rourke felt like a stretched wire, ready to snap. "I'm not handing him over," the sheriff said finally. Rourke chuckled, low and ugly. "Then I'll take him." Behind Rourke, a dozen rifles shifted into ready hands. The deputies inside the jailhouse stiffened. Boone could see them through the bars, one moving toward the door, the other toward the rifle rack. "Don't do this," the sheriff warned. "You got no say in it," Rourke said. "Boone's mine, always has been." Boone stepped to the bars. "If you want me, Rourke, you don't need to spill blood in this street. Step inside and we'll settle it." Rourke's eyes found him in the shadows. "Tempting," he said, "but I'm not here for a fair fight." The sheriff moved then, placing himself square between Rourke and the door. "You've got 1 minute to ride out of Hollow Creek." Rourke tilted his head, studied the sheriff, then spat into the dust. 1 minute's more than you deserve." He turned, mounted his horse, and signaled his men. But Boone noticed the way their eyes stayed on the jailhouse even as they rode off into the dark. This wasn't over. The sheriff came back inside, jaw tight. He looked at Boone like a man trying to decide whether to thank him or curse him. "You know him?" "Know him well enough," Boone said. "We rode together once, long time ago." "And now?" the sheriff asked. Boone shrugged. "Now he thinks I owe him a life. Trouble is, it's not mine he wants to take. It's the one I spared him years back." The sheriff stared at him for a long moment. "Why'd you save my boy today?" Boone leaned forward on the cot. "Because no man ought to watch his kid die when he can stop it, and because I know what it's like to owe a debt you can't repay." The sheriff's eyes narrowed, but he didn't press. He turned and walked out, leaving Boone alone with the creak of the chair and the faint smell of the river still clinging to his clothes. The night dragged on. Somewhere near midnight, Boone heard the faint scratch of metal on metal. He sat up. From the dark corner near the back wall, a small hand slipped through the bars, Tommy's hand, holding a ring of keys. "Don't," Boone said quietly. Tommy's eyes darted toward the front room. "They'll kill you in the morning, or Rourke will before the trial even starts. You saved me. I'm not going to let you die here." Boone shook his head. "You open that door, and you'll be the one paying the price. Your father will know, and he'll never forgive you." Tommy's jaw tightened. "I'd rather he hated me than know I let a man hang for something he didn't do." The boy slid the keys into the lock. Boone hesitated. There was an honesty in Tommy's face that reminded him of a younger version of himself, before the dust, the running, and the half-truths. The lock clicked. Boone stepped out, his boots silent on the worn boards. "Out the back," Tommy whispered. "There's a horse tied near the old livery." Boone moved fast, slipping through the shadows toward the rear door. But as his hand touched the latch, the sound of hooves returned, closer this time, more of them. Rourke was back. Boone darted into the alley, hugging the wall as a dozen riders poured into the main street. This time, they didn't stop in front of the jailhouse. They fanned out, blocking every exit, rifles ready. He heard Rourke's voice cut through the stillness. "Boone, you can run, but you can't hide in a town this small." Boone's mind raced. If he bolted for the livery, he'd never make it. If he went back inside, the sheriff would lock him down, or worse, hand him over. That left one choice. He stepped into the open. "You want me, Rourke?" he called. "Then here I am." The sheriff burst out of the jailhouse, gun in hand. "Boone, get back inside." Boone ignored him, walking toward Rourke with slow, deliberate steps. The riders shifted, their eyes on their leader. Rourke grinned. "You're making this too easy." Boone stopped 10 paces away. "I'm not here to make it easy. I'm here to end it." The sheriff moved between them, gun raised. "This ends with both of you leaving town alive. You settle it somewhere else." Rourke's grin faded. "Number it ends now." Boone could see the man's finger twitching on the trigger. He knew what was coming. The flash, the recoil, the chaos. But before anyone could move, a single gunshot cracked the night. It wasn't Boone. It wasn't Rourke. It came from the boardwalk, where Tommy stood, both hands wrapped around a rifle far too big for him. Rourke's hat flew off his head, the bullet grazing the brim. The riders erupted in shouts, half drawing weapons, half reining their horses. The sheriff's voice roared over it all. "Everyone stand down!" For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Rourke laughed, a low, dangerous sound. "You've got grit, boy, I'll give you that." He looked back at Boone. "We'll finish this, not tonight, but soon." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following like shadows melting into the dark. Boone exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. But he knew Rourke's words weren't a threat. They were a promise. The street emptied slow, the dust from the horses still hanging in the lamplight like smoke after a fire. The sheriff holstered his gun and turned on Boone. "You should have stayed in that cell," he said. Boone gave him a steady look. "And waited for Rourke to drag me out? We both know that Locke wouldn't have stopped him." The sheriff's gaze slid past Boone to his son. Tommy still clutched the rifle, his hands trembling. The boy's eyes were wide, the weight of what he'd just done sinking in. "Inside," the sheriff said sharply. Tommy hesitated, glancing at Boone. "Go on," Boone said, his tone softer than before. The boy obeyed, disappearing into the jailhouse. The sheriff lingered, jaw tight. "You've made things worse." Boone raised an eyebrow. "If you call me still breathing worse, then yeah, I guess I did." The sheriff stepped in close, his voice low. "Rourke's not the kind to bluff. If he says he'll be back, he will. And when he does, it won't be with 12 men. It'll be with 40. Boone shrugged. "Then maybe it's time we stop waiting for him to come to us." The sheriff studied him a moment longer, then shook his head. "You're not my problem after sunrise. Trial's still at first light." Boone didn't argue. He knew the man was wrestling with more than just the law. Pride, blood ties, maybe even doubt. That was his business. Boone had his own to think on. Back in the cell, Boone sat on the cot, turning the night's events over in his mind. Rourke wasn't after justice. He wanted to settle an old score, one Boone had thought long buried. It had been years since that night in the San Pedro Hills. A gunfight over a stolen payroll, bullets in the dark, and Rourke bleeding out in the dirt. Boone had hauled him to safety, patched him up. Rourke had promised a debt, swore he'd pay it one day. Boone figured that day would come in the form of a drink or a horse, not a bullet aimed his way. He should have kept riding when he saw Hollow Creek's sign. Sometime after midnight, the front door creaked open. Light footsteps crossed the floor. Boone looked up to see Tommy again, this time without the keys, just a blanket folded under one arm. "You'll freeze in here," the boy said, sliding it through the bars. Boone took it. "You didn't have to do what you did earlier. Could have got yourself killed." Tommy shrugged. "Couldn't just watch." Boone studied him. "You got more grit than most men twice your age." The boy's cheeks flushed in the dim light. "Rourke, why does he want you so bad?" Boone hesitated. "Because I saved his life. And some men, they don't take kindly to being reminded they once owed someone." Tommy frowned. "That don't make sense." Boone smiled faintly. "Neither does the West most days." Footsteps sounded from the other room, heavier, more deliberate. The sheriff appeared, eyes flicking from Boone to his son. "Bed, now." Tommy left without a word. The sheriff stayed. You planning to sleep tonight? Not likely, Boone said. Good, the sheriff replied. Neither am I. He leaned against the bars, his face in shadow. You didn't kill Rafe. I know that. Boone's eyes narrowed. Then why the trial? Because Rafe's blood is on my family's hands either way, the sheriff said. If I let you walk without a trial, folks will say I traded justice for gratitude, and in this town, a sheriff's word only lasts as long as people believe in it. Boone considered that. So you'd hang a man to keep their faith? The sheriff's silence was answer enough. Just before dawn, the sound of horses returned. Not the slow, deliberate approach of the night before. This was faster, urgent, and coming from multiple directions. The sheriff was already at the window. Damn it, he muttered. It's him. Boone stood, the blanket sliding from his shoulders. Told you he wouldn't wait for the trial. A horn blast split the morning stillness, long, low, and unmistakable. Rourke was calling the town out. The sheriff grabbed his rifle. Stay put. Boone stepped up to the bars. You walk out there alone, he'll put a bullet in you before you can say hello. The sheriff didn't look back. Then I guess you'd better hope I don't. Through the barred window, Boone saw them, more riders than before, their silhouettes black against the pale morning light. Rourke sat at the front, calm as if he owned the street. Boone felt it in his gut. This wasn't going to be a standoff. This was going to be a reckoning. The sun hadn't fully cleared the ridge when the first shot cracked. It wasn't aimed to hit, just a warning, echoing down Hollow Creek's main street. The sheriff stepped onto the boardwalk, rifle in hand, eyes locked on Rourke. Boone watched from the cell, every sense stretched taut. Rourke's voice carried on the cold air. Sheriff, you've got something that belongs to me. The sheriff didn't flinch. He's in my custody. If you want him, you'll have to go through me. Rourke smiled. That slow, dangerous smile Boone remembered from the old days. Was hoping you'd say that. Behind him, riders fanned out, blocking alleys, posting on rooftops. It wasn't a show. It was a siege. Inside the jailhouse, Boone tested the bars, solid as the day they were forged. He glanced at the rifle rack across the room, too far to reach unless the door was open. If this turned into a gunfight, he'd be sitting in a box waiting to die. From outside came the shuffle of boots, townsfolk peeking from doorways, watching with pale faces. Rourke didn't spare them a glance. His eyes stayed fixed on the sheriff. I'll give you one chance, Rourke called. Step aside and I'll take Boone without burning this place to the ground. The sheriff shifted his stance. And if I don't? Rourke's grin widened. Then you'd better start saying goodbye to your boy. Boone felt a cold spike in his chest. Rourke wasn't bluffing. Tommy was the only card the sheriff had, and Rourke had just put it on the table. The sheriff called back, voice steady. You lay a hand on my son, and you won't leave this street alive. Big words, Rourke said. For a man outnumbered 4-1. Boone stepped up to the bars. Sheriff, let me out. The lawman didn't turn. You keep me in here, Boone said, and you're fighting blind. You open this cell, and maybe we both walk away. The sheriff finally glanced over his shoulder. You'd run. Not today, Boone said flatly. Rourke's mine as much as he's yours. The moment hung between them, years of mistrust and unspoken understanding that sometimes survival outweighed grudges. The sheriff swore under his breath, crossed the room, and jammed the key into the lock. The door swung open. Boone stepped out, feeling the weight of freedom settle on his shoulders like an old coat. The sheriff tossed him a rifle. If you turn that on me, I won't, Boone said. They stepped outside together. The street was deathly still, both sides measuring the other. Rourke's men shifted in their saddles, hands near triggers. Looks like the gang's all here, Boone said loudly. Rourke's eyes narrowed. You should have stayed in your cage. Never was good at staying where I'm told, Boone replied. They stood maybe 30 paces apart, years of history unspoken but sharp between them. You owe me, Rourke said. I saved you, Boone shot back. That's not a debt, that's a gift. Rourke's face hardened. No, Boone. You left me breathing when I should have been dead, and every breath since has been a reminder that I wasn't man enough to finish you first." Gasps rippled from the few townsfolk watching. The sheriff's grip tightened on his rifle. "Then here I am," Boone said. "Finish it." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Rourke's hand dropped to his revolver. Boone's rifle came up in the same instant. The first shot split the morning. Boone's. The bullet ripped Rourke's gun from his hand, spinning it into the dust. Before anyone could move, the sheriff's voice thundered, "Stand down!" Some of Rourke's men hesitated. Others didn't. Two rifles cracked from the rooftops. Boone and the sheriff dove for cover behind the trough as splinters flew from the boardwalk. The street erupted in gunfire. Horses screamed, boots pounded, smoke rolled. Boone fired twice, dropping a rifleman from the roof. The sheriff took the other. Rourke scrambled for his gun, but Boone was already on his feet, closing the distance. They met in the street, face to face, hands swinging. Rourke was heavier, stronger, but Boone had the edge of desperation. A fist connected with Rourke's jaw. He staggered, then swung back, catching Boone in the ribs. The fight spilled into the dust, boots kicking up clouds. Around them, the gunfire slowed, both sides watching their leaders tear into each other. Boone drove a knee into Rourke's gut, sending him to one knee. He leveled the rifle at him. "It's over." Rourke spat blood into the dust. "Not until one of us stops breathing." Boone's finger tightened on the trigger, then froze. He saw Tommy in the corner of his eye, standing in the boardwalk shadows, watching. Boone lowered the rifle. "Then you'll just have to live knowing I beat you twice." Rourke stared at him, breathing hard, then gave a slow, cold smile. "You'll regret that." "Maybe," Boone said. Rourke stood, signaled his men, and they backed away, mounting up without another word. Moments later, the street was empty again, save for Boone, the sheriff, and the boy. Smoke drifted in slow ribbons above Hollow Creek, thinning as the morning brightened. The street looked like a battlefield that had changed its mind. Overturned trough, busted porch posts, a hat trampled flat in the dust. Boone's ribs ached where Rourke's fist had found them. His knuckles were raw and leaking. The sheriff wiped blood from his lip with the back of his hand and stared down the road where Rourke's riders had vanished. Tommy broke first. He ran to Boone with the awkward speed of a boy who wasn't used to running toward danger. "You didn't shoot him," he said, breathless, half accusation, half relief. "You had him dead to rights and you didn't." Boone flexed his fingers and winced. "Killing a man's easy. Living with it's the hard part." The sheriff glanced at his son, then at Boone. "Inside," he said, "both of you." They stepped into the jailhouse. The lantern from the night still burned low, a tired eye that hadn't slept. The sheriff shut the door, leaned the rifle against the wall, and for a long beat, no one spoke. Then he opened his desk drawer, pulled out a cloth and a tin of salve, and tossed them to Boone. "Clean up," he said. "You're leaking on my floor." Boone dabbed at his split knuckles. Tommy hovered near the bars, eyes darting between the men like he was taking measure of some sum only grown folks kept in their heads. The sheriff set his hat on the desk, fingers drumming the brim. "Rourke will be back. Not today, maybe not this week, but he'll be back." Boone tied off the rag. "He can find me. He always does." "Maybe he won't have to," the sheriff said. He reached into the drawer again and came up with a cloth-wrapped bundle. He set it down and unfolded it careful, the way a man handles something that carries a memory. Inside lay a flattened slug of lead, gray as old rain. Boone's eyes narrowed. "What's that doing in a lawman's desk?" "Came out of the saloon mirror the night Rafe died," the sheriff said. "Martha kept it. Brought it to me after I pinned your name to a wall. Said I ought to look close before I set the rope. I didn't." He nodded to the misshapen lead. "It's a 44. Rafe carried a 36 and you a 45. Only one man in that room packed a 44. Boone didn't have to say the name. "Rourke," Tommy whispered, the word tasting of rust and shock. The sheriff's jaw went tight. "Angle, distance, all of it lines up. He fired wild when the table went over. Rafe moved. The bullet didn't." "Why sit on it?" Boone asked, voice flat. The sheriff didn't blink. Because the day I took this badge, I promised this town order. Rafe was kin. Folks wanted a name they could carry to Sunday and sleep to at night. You're a drifter with an unlucky face. You fit easy." He looked at Tommy, then back to Boone. And because admitting I'd been wrong meant admitting I'd served pride instead of justice. Tommy swallowed. "Pa," the sheriff held up a hand. "I told myself I'd fix it when Rourke was in irons, when I could point to a villain and say I hadn't been blind, just patient." He breathed once, steadying. "But patience turns into cowardice if you hold it too long." Boone watched him with the weary calm of a man who'd seen better words fail to turn worse deeds. "So what now?" "Now," the sheriff said, picking up the slug, "we'd do it the way I should have from the start." He stepped to the door and pushed it wide. Townsfolk had started to gather, the way a prairie gathers thunder, slow and inevitable. Faces peered over shoulders, hats low, voices low. The sheriff took the boardwalk like a man takes the gallows, square and without hurry. "Hollow Creek," his voice carried clean down the street. Conversation stilled. Chickens somewhere went quiet. "You all know Eli Boone. You know what he's been called. You know what I've called him." He held the flattened lead up so the front rows could see. "This came from Martha's mirror the night Rafe Coulter was shot. It's a .44. My cousin didn't carry one. Boone didn't carry one. But Caleb Rourke did. He let that settle. I placed blame where it fit easy. I won't do that again. There'll be no trial at first light. Not for Boone." Boone felt the air shift, a weight lifting off the street like fog in sun. It wasn't applause. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something like a town learning how to stand up straight again. From the edge of the crowd, Martha snapped her apron and muttered, "About damn time." The undertaker gave a single slow nod, which was as close as his trade came to celebration. Two ranch hands looked at Boone and tipped their hats like they had always known. The sheriff lowered the slug. "If any man here seeks to argue it, he can bring his facts to my desk or his pistol to the street." He paused. "And if Caleb Rourke rides through this town again, he meets the badge he should have met years ago." Murmurs moved like wind through grass. Not fear, not quite. Resolve, maybe. The town had chosen a story it could live with. Not the easy one, but the true one. Sometimes those are the same. Most times they ain't. The sheriff turned back into the jailhouse and shut the door. For a second, he just stood there, hat in his hands, like a man who'd put down a load he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was on his back. "You're free," he said to Boone without looking up. "Paper won't say it. Circuit judge won't bless it, but you won't find a rope on my street." Boone nodded once. "Freedom's lighter when it don't need permission." Tommy stepped closer to Boone, words tumbling. Will you stay? Pa could use a man who can shoot like that." And the sheriff's eyes cut to his son. There was a softness there Boone hadn't seen until now, the kind men save for the private room of their hearts. "Tom," the boy bit his lip. "I know." Boone laid a hand on Tommy's shoulder, a brief steadying weight. "You saved more than my life last night. You saved me from being the kind of man Rourke is. Don't forget that, when your hands start itching for easy answers." He fished in his coat and came up with a coin, dull and rubbed half smooth. "Belonged to a riverboat cook who taught me how to breathe when the water takes you, kept me from drowning twice, once in the river, once in a bottle." He pressed it into the boy's palm. "You keep it for when the world gets loud." Tommy held the coin like it was hot and holy. "You'll come back?" Boone's gaze slid to the sheriff. The two men regarded one another across a span wider than the room. There was apology in it, and something like respect that had lost its way and finally found the road. "Maybe," Boone said, "if the river runs me here again." The sheriff nodded once. "If it does, you won't find your name on my door." They stood quiet a beat longer, the three of them held in a small stillness that felt like a prayer spoken without words. Then Boone set his hat, rolled his shoulders, and stepped into the street. Hollow Creek had put itself back together some while he was inside. Men were righting benches, sweeping glass. The trough still lay on its side like a dead ox. Martha was already haggling the livery hand over a pane of glass and winning. Life, stubborn as mesquite. Boone crossed to the livery. His horse, a black with more endurance than grace, tossed its head like it had a story to tell too. He saddled slow, the way you do when you're counting up what you're taking and what you're leaving. "Boone," the sheriff called from the boardwalk. Boone looked up. "You said some debts don't come in dollars," the sheriff said. "Reckon I owe you one that doesn't come in words." Boone smiled with one side of his mouth. "Reckon you paid it already." He swung into the saddle. Tommy had come out again and stood beside his father. The coin flashed once in his fist before he pocketed it like a secret. Boone turned the horse toward the east road. The sun had finally climbed above the ridge, making a pale river of the dust ahead. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat at the boy, then at the lawman, and put his heels to the black. He didn't look back for a long while. When he did, the town was a smudge of roofs and smoke in the distance, and the sound that carried wasn't gunfire or hooves, but the faint hum of a place getting on with the business of being alive. Out on the flats, the wind came up. It combed the grass and cooled the sweat on Boone's neck. He thought of the bullet in the sheriff's desk, of a boy with a coin and a choice, of a man like Rourke who'd wear his shame as armor until it sank him. Some men were rivers, moving, changing, flooding, and receding. Some were stones, unbending until they cracked. He didn't know which he was yet. Maybe both. He camped that night under a stand of cottonwoods 10 miles from town, ribs throbbing in time with the cicadas. The stars came hard and cold, and the fire was small by choice. He chewed on jerky and let the taste sit until it gave up whatever it had left to give. When the wind shifted, he swore he could smell the river back in Hollow Creek, wet, green, alive. Sometime past midnight, the horse raised its head and snorted a warning. Boone's hand found the pistol before his eyes were fully open. The sound that followed wasn't a man or a catamount. It was a single hoof tapping once against rock, a rider signaling another in the dark. Boone lay still, every nerve awake. From the black beyond the cottonwoods, a shape peeled loose and grew edges. A lone rider on a rangy bay. No bandana, no rifle naked in the hand. The horse stopped just beyond the firelight's reach. Boone didn't stand. He didn't need to. "Evening, Caleb," he said. Rourke chuckled. "Can't say you don't know your ghosts." "Figured you'd try the gentleman's visit," Boone replied. "Hard to give up habits." Rourke didn't edge closer. "I came to tell you you're right. This ain't over." "Never figured it was," Boone said. "But you came alone. That's interesting." Rourke's teeth flashed in the dark. "Consider it proper. Street was too crowded this morning. I like a fair track when I race." A pause. "You could have shot me. Twice. You didn't." Boone's voice stayed level. "Tommy was watching." Rourke's laugh was soft. "You always were sentimental." He shifted in the saddle. "Next time, he won't be there." Boone nodded. "Next time, maybe you won't be either." For a breath, the night held both men in a balance as fine as a trigger break. Then, Rourke wheeled the bay and became a shadow again, the sound of his horse, swallowed by the rustle of leaves. Boone sat with the pistol across his knees and watched the fire sink into red. He waited until the first bird tried morning on for size before he slept. At dawn, the world went gold. Boone saddled and mounted and found the east road again. The country opened ahead like a held breath let go. He didn't know where it ran, not exactly. He never did. But he knew how to ride it honest. Near noon he crossed a dry wash and saw, half buried in silt, a sliver of mirror, maybe from a wagon long smashed by weather and time. He reined in, watched light flare in the shard, and thought of a bullet taken from glass and the way truth sometimes waits, patient for a man to be ready to tell it. He left the mirror where it lay, turned the black with his knees, and rode on. Behind him, Hollow Creek would be hammering a new pane into Martha's saloon, righting chairs, arguing over who shot truer from the rooftops. In the sheriff's desk, A44 slug would sit like a sermon, heavy enough to keep a man's hand honest when it reached for a pen. And in a boy's pocket, a coin would knock soft against bone when choices came hard. Ahead of Boone, the land kept its old, simple counsel. Wind, grass, sun, a road cut by hooves and hope. He wasn't hunted here, not today. He wasn't forgiven either. Forgiveness is a town you build, not one you find. He touched the brim again, to the country, to the river, to whoever was keeping score, and let the horse stretch. Some debts, he figured, got paid loud. Others got paid quiet, 1 mile at a time. He'd pay what he owed the only way he knew, by leaving more mercy than trouble in the places that learned his name. And if Rourke came calling tomorrow or a year from now, well, the West had room enough for both kinds of men. Until it didn't. Boone smiled into the wind, like a man who'd finally remembered how to breathe. And the road, pleased with the company, went on ahead of him without end.